Welcome back. In the previous lesson, we have already designed the user interface. So our user interface looks like this. So now we are going to insert the rest of the code. So to insert the rest of the code, we don't need the toolbox to be pinned here. We can click on the pin to unpin it so that it will auto hide. Now we have a bigger working space. And then you should go and download this file from the resource section. And we are going to insert everything here into our project. So what we do is first we have to delete the imports for the libraries on top here. Select everything and hit delete. And then we come to our file. We grab our file, scroll up to the imports, select all the imports, and then you copy it, and then come back to your code and right click, paste it here. And then go to the event button, click on it, and then scroll until you find form closing. So double click on this to insert the form closing event handler. Now the form 1 closing event handler will be triggered when the user clicks on the X button to close this form. So when this happens, it will trigger the form 1 closing event handler, which will then do the cleanups necessary to have a graceful shutdown. So that's why we need it. So now we can insert the rest of the class here, form 1 class. So we can go to this, delete all of this, and then we copy the form 1 class from our file, which is over here. Copy everything inside here, from here all the way to the bottom. Up to here. This is all the class, form 1 class. So copy this, come in here and paste it there. Then save it. So now it's ready. So let me just explain the code. So something new, some new libraries. For example, using system.NET sockets. So these sockets are necessary in order to create the TCP client listener. And then we also need to have system.NET. System.NET is to store the IP address of the server when it receives the IP address. That's why we need to declare it here. And of course, threading, we need threads. Now over here we have a socket. Now this socket will be used for connecting with the server. When the server connects to us, we need to assign the connection to this socket. And then over here we have string input, is to store the commands that we are going to send to the server. And then over here we have two threads that we create. We need to create a listening thread because our client is a hybrid client. It is acting also like a server. That's why we need to have a thread to listen for connections. And we also want to have a thread to run the client because we don't want the whole form to stop and wait while there is no connection. So we need to run this as separate threads, separate from the main thread. Now take note that in C# programming, the form itself runs in the main thread. So we have to create separate threads for any of the tasks which may cause blocking. So for example, when the program runs, it is waiting for connection. So we don't want the form to become unresponsive before the connection is established. So that's why we have to create these additional threads here. So the thread and these threads will be running concurrently in parallel with the main thread, which is the form itself. This is a good design for graphical user interface applications. Then the form1 event handler is over here. Take note that the moment the form1 is shown, it will create a thread to start listening, because this is after all a hybrid client which has a listening port. And then the start listen is a task that makes it into a listening port. So here we have a TCP listener. TCP listener is coming is coming from your socket, from your library up here called system net sockets. That's where you get your TCP listener. And here, any IP address will be bound. For example, the loopback address 127.0.0.1, the intranet address 192.168.1. Whatever it might be, and also any public IP address will be bound. And then here the socket we are using is 6666, although you can put 80 if you want to be stealthy. And then you start the listening. And then here the to strip status label, you want to inform the user that it is now listening. So this to strip is referring to here. So that's where all the status messages will be shown. And then you enter a perpetual for loop. And here is where you start to accept any connection from the server. Once the server connects, you will then extract the IP address from the server and store it here in this object called IPN endpoint. And then here you will update the to strip status to inform the user that there is a connection from and the address that you want to display. So this is how you create a string. So you create a string and you assign it to the text property of the to strip label, so that your to strip label will update to show a message saying connection from and then the IP address of the server. So that's the purpose of this line. After that, you will create a new run client thread in order to handle this connection. So notice we are having 3 threads here. The first thread is your main application thread, which is taking care of the responsiveness of the user interface, so that even though in the background there are things happening like connections from server and client, the form is still responsive to user interaction. It will not block. So that's why we have 3 different threads. So the main thread is the form application. Then the second thread is your listening thread, and the third thread is your client server thread, which is this one, run client. So this is what a real graphical user interface application is designed. This is how you design it. You have to use multiple threads so that it will not cause the graphical user interface to block and wait. So now your run client is down here. So this is where you interact with the server that has just connected. You extract all the sockets, the streams and everything, so that you can make use of it to receive and as well as to send data back and forth between the client and the server. And you also create a new string builder called string input in order to accept and also to send messages between client and server. And then there's a message loop here. So this message loops will keep on running. So every time there's a message coming from the server, you will extract it here and append it to the string input. And at the end of it, you will put a new line /return so that it goes to the new line. So this string input will contain the messages that are coming from the server. Whatever the response from the server is, it will be put into this string builder. And then after that, you will call the application do events so that it will temporarily release the thread to give way to the main application to update the user interface. And then over here, you want to display this message from the server to the string, to the text box number 2, text box number 1. So that is why you need to call display messages, because you need the threads are not allowed to interfere with the internal running of another thread. So these string messages are coming from a run client thread, but you have to input it. You have to post this thread into the text box 1. which is running in a separate thread. Text box 1 here is running in the main application thread, but the messages coming from the server is coming from the run client thread. So how do you pass data between one thread to another in order that you can display here? You have to use delegates. Alright, that is what this thing is for, display message. So display message is a function that accepts this string input here, that this string input is coming from the run client thread, and display message will then pass this string input into the main application thread, so that the main application thread will update the text1 box to show the messages coming from the server. So let's take a look at this display message now. So this is the display message here. So in order to, display message is a user-defined function, by the way. So this display message here will accept the string that's coming from the server, and then it will make use of this syntax called invoke required. Invoke required means it's telling the main application thread that, look here, I'm waiting to put something in your text box 1. So when you're ready, let me know. That's the meaning of invoke required. After that, you have to use a delegate in order to transfer messages. Delegate is like a middleman. Delegate is used to transfer messages between threads. So here you have to declare a display delegate over here. You have to create a display delegate over here. So you use the invoke function. The invoke function will receive a delegate and the message that you want to send. So when you call invoke, that means you are asking this delegate to take your message and go and send it to the main application thread, so that the main application thread can update his text box 1. That is how it is done. Alright, so that is the purpose of these two lines. So you have an if statement which invokes, and then an else statement which appends the message. So you invoke first. Once it's ready, then you will come here and append the message to text box 1. So it's a bit complicated, this kind of delegate thing, but basically what you're doing is using a delegate as a middleman between two different threads. The running thread, the running client thread, which accepts messages from the server, and the main application thread, whose job is to update the user interface. And then we also have a key down event handler. Let's take a look over here. The key down event handler over here will be triggered when the user enters the command in the text box number 2 and hits enter. So normally the text that is entered here is a command like directory listing, dir, and so on. So this is the syntax of it. It will accept the whatever event that has been generated, in this case key down, and it will be passed in to this function as a key events argument. So over here, it will test whether the key that the user enter is an enter key. If it is enter key, then it will append whatever the user type into this string input string builder, and then it will push it out to the server over here. So stream writer is job, as we have seen in the previous multiple lessons, stream writer's job is to push data across the stream, the network stream. So that is what it's doing here. So once you flush it, whatever the command that the user enters will be pushed all the way to the server. After that, you will have to clear the string buffer. That's why you have this function called remove to empty the string input, so that you'll be ready to receive the new messages that is coming back, the response which is coming back from the server. Then you will also be looking for certain commands like exit, terminate, and clear screen. So if the user types exit, then you will clean up. You will call the cleanup function. So this cleanup function merely cleans up the client, not the server. So the client will just exit, will just clear up everything, the sockets, the connection, everything, and disconnect. And then after 5 seconds, if the client is still up and running, the server will try to connect again. Then the second command that the user can type is terminate. So once the user types terminate, That means you will send this command to terminate the server. Then you clean up the client itself, and then when the server receives the terminate command, the server will also wrap things up. So when the server receives the terminate command, let's go back to the server part. So when the when the server receives the terminate command, we are now in the server part. The server will call stop server, and stop server will come up here, clean up itself, and then call the exit function, which will then shut down the server. Right? So that's how the server part works. That's how the terminate command works. The last thing you want to talk about is the form closing. Form closing event will be triggered when the user clicks on the X button here, and when that happens, you'll be triggering this event handler, and then the event handler form closing will clean itself up, will clean up our client, and also call the exit, and this exit will totally shut down your client. Alright, now note that if you were to suddenly close your client by clicking the X button, the server will still be up and running. It will not shut down, because the server has got a perpetual loop for loop, which will continue to spawn itself. So the only way that you want to shut down the server is you send the terminate command, as I've explained over here. So that's all for this walkthrough. We can now build this. So let's click on build. Now the build has started, as you can see on the bottom left corner, and it has succeeded. There are no errors. So in the next video, in the next walkthrough, we are going to test our both system, the project. For the server part, we are going to run our server, and we are also going to run our client and check it out to see if it works. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you for watching.